All right, commissioners, I think we've got all 4 commissioners online except for Rusty Popacek, who'll be with us. And this is our spring budget meeting, which will cover our audit presentation by Ide Bailey and Brian Stavanger. Cover that, and then Tyson will cover some of our 2021 budget schedules. The actual schedule, the proposed mill levy, personnel, fees, and capitals. So right now, I'll turn it over to Mr. Stavanger.
Okay, thank you very much. What I'm going to attempt to do is share my screen so that I can, and I'll share with you the executive summary. I'm going to get this set up just to make sure. How's that look? Can everyone see the executive summary?
Yep.
Looks good.
Okay, wonderful. Now, hopefully when I'm done, we can figure out how to unshare this, but for now, we're good. Okay, so thank you for having me. Brian Stavanger, a partner with Ide Bailey. I've been working with the Park District for many years and happy to walk through the 2019 financial statements and audit results. What's interesting is that the next topic on your agenda is the 2021 budget. So sometimes difficult to remember what years we're even looking at. So this is looking back at the year ended 12/31/19. In this executive summary, what this does is takes the full audit report and summarizes it into a version that's much easier to not only present, but also hopefully as you sit and receive the presentation, much easier to digest. There's a lot of detailed information in the full audit, which is very, very good information, but it can be very overwhelming, especially if you're not into numbers like I am and Tyson and others are. So this hopefully drives a much more high-level discussion, but if there are any questions, we do have the full audit that we can jump into. At this point, it is in draft format. We come to this meeting with it in draft format, really, really close to being able to finalize. Really just want you the opportunity to look at it, and once you're okay with it, we will finalize in advance of next week's board meeting. So as I go through this, I will try to pause at the end of each slide just to make sure I allow opportunities for questions or any added commentary from management. So there may be some pauses. They're not meant to be awkward, but it may happen. So here we go. The audit recap. The first few slides are really going to be a lot less on the numbers and more on what is the audit process entail, what rules are followed, things like that. The audit recap, when we enter into the audit, we've got some objectives we're following. There's really 3 levels of standards that we have to follow as auditors. It's kind of the baseline, generally accepted auditing standards. Because you are a government, we also are required to follow government auditing standards, which is a little more stringent, and another layer of standards we have to follow. And then because of the federal money that you receive, mostly through Valley Senior Services, we also have to follow that Title II U.S. Code of Federal Regulation. So when we're doing an audit, we're following those 3 standards. As we work through our audit, we are obtaining reasonable but not absolute assurance, and that's very important. If we were to provide absolute assurance that your financial statements are free of material misstatement, we would be there pretty much side by side with Tyson and others throughout the year looking at 100% of transactions, and we of course don't do that. Because we're looking at more of a sample, we are obtaining reasonable assurance but not providing that absolute assurance. What do our procedures look like? Kind of just touched on this. We examine things on a test basis, and what we're examining are or is evidence that supports amounts within your financial statement. So we obtain essentially an internal financial statement, and then we audit that and we verify that. We do that through a lot of different ways. We also talk a lot with management just to ensure that we understand the internal financial statements. We also have to assess the quality of accounting principles to make sure all the correct principles are being followed, and also take a look at significant estimates. Significant estimates in this case are mostly done by third parties. The other post-employment benefits, or OPEB, that's really calculated by an actuary, and we review that along with management. And then the net pension liability, we obtain schedules and actuary reports for the City of Fargo pension plan and then ND PERS. So a lot of times when we're looking at significant estimates, those are more, I would say, management type estimates. But in this case, it's a lot of reliance on third party. So we're working more with a third party to understand those estimates. Continue on the audit recap, the timeline. And this timeline is, I would say, the typical timeline. Last year, it was delayed a little bit, mainly on the reporting side, just because of the transition to some new personnel. It just took a little bit longer to get through. And I think we visited with you in July last year. But this audit recap timeline is much more of a normal timeline. We start in October with our planning, and we do pre-work. We meet with the Park District management, gain a good understanding of how the year has gone, really set our expectations. We completed our year-end testing in March and April, which typically we are on site at the depot. This year was much different, as everybody's lives have been different. So I said our team was dedicated to work the week of March 30th on the audit, and we all worked remotely to complete that. Continued that work through April and into early May. I have highlighted the audit opinion of May 7th. We do anticipate getting approval after this meeting and hopefully finalizing tomorrow. If not tomorrow, probably Friday. But we should be done in advance of that board meeting. So again, with everything that is going on in the world, we were able to get back to really the normal audit timeline, which I think is a big testament to the staff there. Not only, still dealing with a lot of learning and understanding from Tyson and others, but now having to do it all remotely, and we were able to accomplish that. So very, very much a big thank you to everyone at the Park District. So I'll pause there briefly. Any questions on the audit process, timeline?
I got a question for Tyler. Was it easier this go around than last year?
No, not really.
No?
No, last year I wasn't as involved. So last year, I came on probably the first week. My second week here was the first week they started. So it was mostly the business office that was involved last year. So I think it went a lot smoother for the business office and everybody else involved. But then, like Brian said, the remote, adding that into there and having to scan everything in added a little extra layer of complication. But overall, I think everything went well.
Well, you surprised me with your answer. I would have figured you would have said yes, because I knew you started right about when the mayhem was starting.
Well, Jared, you would have asked Chris Creech. She would have confirmed your theory. It wasn't here.
Yeah, Chris probably has a different opinion.
All right.
Okay, audit results. So once we complete our audit, we issue several reports. I'm going to walk you through those, and then eventually here we're going to get to some actual numbers, and hopefully everyone will get a little more excited. Financial statements. So in the financial statements, received a clean, unmodified audit opinion. That's really what you want when you go through an audit. When any entity or business goes through a financial statement audit, that's really what you're seeking out. That means that based on our audit procedures, we are comfortable in saying that the financial statements are materially accurate, fairly presented, and are following all the correct accounting principles. Now, our opinion is based on our work and what we've done. I think what's important to point out here is that it really is management's responsibility to ensure that they're following the accounting rules. Everything is fairly stated, not misrepresented, and not inaccurate. And we are really just we do our procedures and we confirm that for you. So it's a management auditor relationship to come to our conclusion, and again, a clean, unmodified opinion on those financial statements. Second part of the audit results is we want to make sure we talk about any findings that we have. And a lot of times in other instances, a finding is what I would truly classify as a finding, and is much more about internal controls or a lack thereof. In the case of the 2019 audit, and it's really the same findings that we had in 2018. So the findings this last year were the same as the previous year. I don't really like to look at these as findings. I actually despise that word. What I like to look at this as is we're just being very transparent as to what the auditor's relationship is with management as we go through the audit process. 20 years ago, these were not findings. There was no such thing as a preparation of financial statement or material journal entry finding. These were created from the Enron, Arthur Andersen in the early 2000s. And what happened was a determination was made that Arthur Andersen, as the auditor, was too close with Enron and was not transparent enough with the board and really outside investors as to what they were handling on behalf of Enron. And so all of a sudden, as auditors, we're required to report any of these items as findings, which again, I don't like. But really it is just sharing with you, previous to 2018, the finance director at the Park District prepared the financial statements, and really we reviewed them on his behalf, and we typically did not have any adjustments throughout the audit. Going into 2018, we really anticipated these findings to occur just with the turnover and with Tyson starting really the week that we began auditing. We just knew, and Tyson would agree, it was likely that we would need to carry a little bit more of the load in 2018. And then going into 2019, I mentioned we started planning in October. We were talking with Tyson, and he said, you know what, I think I might expect this to happen again this year, only because there is so much going on at the Park District that this is almost the last thing that he needs to worry about. So we did anticipate this happening again. It's unfortunate that it's called a finding, but it is. But transparency is those financial statements and that full audit. I Bailey prepared those, and we also proposed some adjustments to get those to what we believe to be correct balances. Now, as we continue to work with Tyson and everyone else there at the Park District, I think as he continues to get more and more comfortable in his role, we do plan on a lot of these findings going away. But certainly at this point, want to make sure we're very transparent in sharing that with you. The other thing is, we mentioned the timeline in the audit this year, and Tyson really just said it. Overall, it went a lot better. If you talk to Chris and you look at the timeline, we're able to deliver this in May like we normally do. So overall, from our standpoint, things did go a lot smoother this year. We still have this to report to you from a transparency standpoint, but overall, very, very happy with how everything went. So I will pause there. Financial statement opinion and financial statement findings, just if anyone has any questions on those. Okay, we also issue a federal audit, and that is an audit solely on the federal awards that are spent mostly through Valley Senior Services. The results on that federal audit, an unmodified opinion, that clean unmodified opinion. And then we also have to issue results of any internal control findings or any compliance findings, and there were none in those testing. That's very, very good. Findings in a financial statement audit, I would say, are fairly common, especially the ones that I just described on the previous slide. It's not very common to have federal findings, and if you do, generally that's going to lead to a discussion with the federal government, and they're going to wonder what happened. So it's always very good to see that there were no findings with that federal audit. The last slide before we get into some actual numbers, we also issue a management letter. That's a letter, a 3 to 4 page letter that we are required to issue to the board and management. A lot of it is really just understanding the responsibility of us as auditors and management's responsibility. But we also share in there any audit adjustments that we could essentially pass on or ignore. Anytime we're doing an audit, we audit based on thresholds, and there's a ceiling. If any potential adjustment is over that ceiling, we really need to work with management to make sure that adjustment is made. There's also a floor. If there's anything under the floor, really small and insignificant, we can completely ignore it. Any potential adjustments between the floor and the ceiling, we can pass on, but we have to communicate to the board and management through this management letter. So these adjustments were not made. It was just a reclassification within Courts Plus, some accounts receivable balances that were credits. And then there is AR over 90 days of about $6,700. And there's really no allowance for doubtful accounts within that. I would say going forward in what we're currently living through and just the potential inability of customers to pay bills in a lot of different industries, that would be really one to continue to monitor to determine if potentially there should be an allowance for bad debts. And then the last one, which was actually on here last year as well, is not recording an OPEB liability related to the North Dakota Retiree Health Insurance Credit Fund. We actually are very much on board with not recording this in any North Dakota government that we work with that has this liability. If we can, we try to avoid reporting it. The reason being, all it does is add 4 to 5 pages in that full audit report. Doesn't add a lot of value for anyone reading it, and we actually strongly encourage to not record it, to just save everyone time. But we'll continue to monitor that. If that ever gets to that level that we believe to be the ceiling, we may not have a choice. We may have to record it, but for now, we're saving some pages within that audit report. So now we can move into some numbers and some analysis, some 10-year trend analysis, but I'll pause again just to allow for any questions or maybe management has any added commentary on the audit process, the audit results for 2019. Right, everyone's excited. Cash and investments. The term I keep hearing in the last 6 weeks is cash is king. And cash has very much become king in the COVID-19 world. It's important to have cash on hand for reserves and for other things, but you hear that term rainy day fund. As auditors, when we're talking about cash and fund balance and what do you have in the bank, it's normally not for times like these or like we're living through now, but this really stresses the importance of having cash on hand. This is a 10-year look at the cash and investments in the Park District, broken into 3 categories. These categories are, if you look at the actual audit report, these are essentially their own funds or own departments is another way to look at it. You've got capital projects, which all the capital projects are tracked in this one fund. You've got debt service, so a collection of taxes and special assessments to repay long-term debt is accounted for in that debt service fund. And then the general fund, which is where a lot of your operational activities are reported out of. Those 3 categories you can see for the last 10 years, the cash balances in those categories. At the end of 2019, what do you have? Roughly, probably just under $19 million in total cash and investments. As has been the case, really the last 6-7 years, capital projects maintains the majority of that cash and investment balance. There are annual transfers to that capital projects fund where that cash sits and then is used in the future to internally finance capital projects. The debt service fund maintains a fairly consistent balance. It increased a little bit this year, but generally right around 3 to 4 million in cash and investments at the end of the year. And then the general fund, you can see, has slowly increased over the last 5 years, sitting at just over $4 million. We're going to look at this on the next slide. Really, what does that mean having that much cash on hand. And there's some other slides too where we'll do some analysis. But overall, for the most part, in the last 6 years, some fairly consistent cash and investment balances overall, ranging from that $15 to $20 million range. So the next slide, which I'd like to get to, I think puts this into perspective, which is puts it into a ratio. Because if you look and you just look at the raw dollar amounts, say we have $19 million, that's a lot of money. But what does that mean for your operations? We believe the liquidity ratio is one that we can look at quickly to see, really how liquid are you on your balance sheet? How much do you have in liquid cash or something that can be easily converted to cash to be able to pay essentially your short-term bills, your monthly bills, as well as any long-term debt that you have due in the coming year? You can see for the most part, other than a little jump in 2013, right around that 3 to 4 liquidity ratio. And what that means is for every dollar that you have for a short-term liability, your monthly bills, your payroll, your long-term debt that is due the next year, for every dollar that you owe, in 2019, for example, you have about 3.9 or $3.90 in the bank. So you've got a good strong cushion to be able to not only fund what's due in the coming year, but also have a little bit of a rainy day fund. So generally in any entity, 1.00 is the absolute minimum. If you have under that, then you are not very liquid, and you may struggle paying bills. Generally, you want to be 2 or above to make sure you've got adequate reserves and adequate liquidity to pay your bills. So good, strong, real consistent between 3 and 4 on that liquidity ratio. So we're going to go into the specific funds or departments now, and I'll pause just briefly to see if there's any questions or comments. So
I anticipate this is going to look quite different a year from now after the pandemic is behind us and you can graph it out. Is that accurate, or is that my way off?
I would say my reaction would be that would be an expectation that I would have. It's just not business as usual, and I would suspect if you haven't already, you'll have to dip into that rainy day fund to get through 2020 and potentially further. But I would also allow if Dave or Tyson or anyone else from management has any feedback or projections on that.
Yeah, I think we hope for it to be pretty minimal. Right now we're going through the budgets. We're reducing, our capital expenses for next year. We're reducing our operating and our personnel. So hopefully with our plan is to be able to reduce enough to where we don't have to dip into that rainy day fund very much, if any. So I'm hoping that we're still going to be pretty liquid next year, kind of staying in the same ratio. But right now it's really hard. It's really hard to predict. The budget's changing every day. And a bit, like we've talked previously, a big part of it's state aid. So we'll see kind of later in the year where that's going to be at. But our hope is we'll still be kind of within the same ratio.
And Jerry, we'll touch on that, in item number 2 on our agenda, just looking into next year's budget. So we'll be able to explain that a little bit better.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, the next few slides are focusing only on the general fund. So you've got capital projects where those significant capital projects are operated out of, that is separate from the general fund. Debt service, generally those more significant debt service, bond and note payments are made out of a separate fund. This is more of your operational fund, your general fund. So we're going to look at the revenue streams for the last 10 years. And as you can see, it really doesn't fluctuate a lot, and we really wouldn't expect it to fluctuate a lot. Taxes make up the majority of the revenue stream. There's also charges for services and contributions. That would be the second largest. You've got some intergovernmental, that state aid revenue that Tyson just mentioned, helps fund some of the general fund operations. And then other would be interest, donations, any other miscellaneous revenue. Overall in 2019, roughly $22 million in total. But you can see really the makeup of those revenue streams, the allocation and where that money is coming from, doesn't really change from year to year. And that really is what we would expect in something like a general fund, especially with the park district. The next slide would be expenditures and transfers out. Expenditures would be your normal operating expenditures for wages and benefits, program expenses, repairs and maintenance, supplies, utilities. And that would be represented in your current expenditures, that blue line for each year. There is some smaller capital outlay that is done out of the general fund. As I mentioned, the capital projects fund really is reserved for the more significant projects. There was about $1.5 million in capital outlay done out of the general fund. You can see that was probably a little bit higher than you've seen in the last few years, but nothing out of the ordinary. There is a tiny bit of debt service out of the general fund as well. Most of the significant debt service is paid out of that separate debt service fund, but the general fund does handle a little bit of debt service. And then lastly, transfers out. There's annual transfers out to the capital projects fund, to Courts Plus. You can see really fairly consistent the last 6 years on the amount of transfers that are going out. But the operations of the general fund, not only on this slide for expenditures and transfers, but also the previous slide on revenues, for the most part, very consistent, which is what we would expect to see in a general fund. So with revenues and expenses, generally you're going to have, if there's anything left over, if there's revenues that exceed expenses, that goes to the fund balance. The fund balance is the accounting term for reserves. It doesn't necessarily equal your cash and investments, but usually it's close. Cash is king. That's why we have that cash graph. But from an accounting perspective, there are some non-cash items that are included in financial statements, and that is what makes this fund balance a little bit different than cash and investments, but for the most part, close. It is important to have a positive fund balance. Why is it important? Bond rating agencies love fund balances. They will reward you with more favorable ratings. It produces investment income, source of working capital to meet cash flow needs. And number 3, which is, I swear we had this slide for years, but it really makes sense now. If there's unexpected expenditures or revenue shortfalls being the key, I think, right now, that's why it's important to have a fund balance. You'll see your fund balance in the general fund has been very consistent over time. There are certain governments that their philosophy at the board level is we don't want to carry much in our fund balance. And those governments who have that philosophy, which it's not a right or wrong philosophy, but right now they're dealing with how do we get through operating like we normally do? We're running out of cash. We're going to have to go borrow. That's the importance of having a fund balance, a rainy day fund. A fund balance, like any government accounting rule, it's just never that simple. I won't spend much time on this slide, but the fund balance can be broken down into 5 different categories. The Fargo Park District and the general fund, you utilize 3 of these categories. The very first one on the left, non-spendable, that's essentially if you have prepaid items or inventory, that automatically gets allocated to that non-spendable category. The other 2 categories you have, if you go towards the right, the assigned. You have assigned certain fund balances or essentially earmarked some of the fund balance for specific items, and I'll go into those on the next slide. Those are not legally restricted. You can always change your mind on those, but it's more of an internal earmark. You've assigned it towards certain projects or certain categories. Everything else that remains is that unassigned, which is really your true reserves or rainy day fund. So remember that non-spendable, assigned, unassigned. So here is your fund balance, your total fund balance for the last 10 years, broken down into those 3 categories. You can see you really started taking advantage of that assigned fund balance, or the ability to internally earmark. You started doing that in 2011. That's that blue within each year. So what types of things are you assigning? You've assigned certain dollars for pension, forestry, insurance. Friends of the Depot has a little bit, and Fargo Park District Foundation. So those are internal earmarks. If you ever wanted to dip into those, you certainly can. They're not legally restricted, but just more internally. And then everything that's left over is that green, or that unassigned. At the end of 2019, about 1.6, almost 1.7 million in unassigned. So these numbers, they're important to understand, just like that cash graph. Someone looks at these and just looks at the numbers and says, that's a lot to have in your fund balance. What we like to do is convert that to what is that fund balance as a percentage of your annual operating expenses. And that is on this slide. So you can see, you know, there was some the low spots were probably what, 2011, 12, and 13. It was 16 to 18%. 14, 15, 16, 17 got above 20%, got up to 25% in 2018 and dropped down just a little bit. It's at about 24% in 2019. What I would say is that these fund balance percentages are probably a good spot to be at. That 20 to 25% is generally what we see in similar type governments to yours. What that means is if you had no revenues coming in, you could operate as is for about 3 months. That's essentially the reserves that you have in your fund balance. What are some other outside organizations potentially recommending? The National Government Finance Officers Association, they actually recommend a much lower. Well, they really say you should have no less than 5 to 15%. If you're dropping to 5% or below, you really have extremely minimal reserves. I would say, again, the 20 to 25% range is much more normal, what we see, and you've been very consistent the last 6 years. So I'll pause there before we move into some other funds, just if anyone has any questions on the general fund or any comments to make. Okay, other funds, and these we won't dive as deep into these other funds, but don't want to ignore them completely. In the debt service fund, which collects taxes and specials and pays the majority of the debt service payments, this is their year-end fund balance in total dollars. So you can see this fluctuates a little bit from year to year, generally ranging from 3 to 4 million. At the end of 2019, it was over 5 million, most likely due to a timing deal and collection issue, but not a whole lot of change, a lot of consistency, which is really what we like to see in these types of funds. So in that debt service fund, approximately 5.3 million at the end of the year in your fund balance. Capital Projects Fund, a reminder that there is some capital outlay done out of the general fund. Those are generally the smaller capital projects. The more significant projects are accounted for within this Capital Projects Fund. There are miscellaneous revenues that come in here if you are ever bonding or taking out any debt to pay for capital projects. Those proceeds would be recorded here. And then there are annual transfers from the general fund put in here to be used. This Capital Projects Fund, I think the first 4 years really a focus of growing that a little bit more, having a little bit more in that end of the year fund balance to be able to be utilized into the future. The last 3 years have been very consistent between that $8 and $9 million mark, just over $9 million at the end of 2019 in that Capital Projects Fund. Courts Plus. This graph is a little bit different. This is taking a look at the operations in one spot. You've got the operating expenses are actually on the top line, the green line. The blue line is operating revenues. And then the very last line there is the annual operating loss. This is before any transfers come in from the general fund. And this really is no surprise. Just from a true operating standpoint, the revenues are not sufficient to cover the expenses. That really has been annually supplemented by an annual transfer from the general fund. It's budgeted for about $200,000 annually to help the Courts Plus Fund continue to operate. And that was the case this year. A lot of consistency here. As expenses increase or decrease, the revenues tend to follow it. And generally, the total loss can be covered by that $200,000 annual transfer from the general fund. Just a few more slides. This one, the next few looking at Valley Senior Services. This one, just the revenue streams. You can see intergovernmental revenues, really what drive the revenues for Valley Senior Services. The green would be charges for services. And then all other, mainly interest, donations, and other miscellaneous contained there. Over $5 million, roughly $5.3 million in 2019 in revenues. And then Valley Senior Services expenditures. You see not a lot of fluctuation here either, which is what we would expect. Pay wages. Other operating would be meal expenses, supplies, travel, repairs and maintenance, and then capital. Capital is a much smaller component, but every year there is certain capital. In 2019, new vehicles were purchased to help with delivery. That would be the increase in that capital outlay in 2019. So just under $5 million in expenditures in 2019 for Valley Senior Services. And then the very last graph that I have is debt service coverage. And you know, with the amount of debt that the Fargo Park District has, and really that a lot of governments rely on, debt is a huge component to financing capital projects and to be able to finance capital projects. We always like to look at what is the annual debt service coverage. And this is only looking at, on an annual basis, what are the cash flows being generated to cover those years' debt service, principal, and interest payments. So it does not take into account any reserves that are in place. So it's really on an annual basis, are you generating enough cash flow to pay your debt? It's broken down between the governmental funds, which is really mostly the debt service fund, but also the general fund has a little bit of debt service. That would be that blue line. And then the green line is Courts Plus. So that blue line, actually, before I get into that, there's also a line on this graph right on the 1.00 line. That's really on an annual basis, kind of the minimum you want to target. You want to be generating $1 in positive cash flows to pay $1 of principal and interest. That's why we have that line identified there. You know, really 2012 and 2014 dropped below that line. In 2014 in the governmental funds dropped down to almost zero, but that would be an instance where reserves were more than adequate to help fund debt service that year. But other than that, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, it is going to fluctuate a little bit based on the timing of cash flows. But good, strong debt service coverage ratios, meaning there's really no concern for the ability or lack thereof to pay your debt. I would never look at this graph on just a one-year basis. I like to look at the entirety of the graph. We saw those coverage ratios drop continually in a 4 or 5 year period. That's where we would begin to become alarmed and say, you might want to look at your revenue streams. Something has happened. Either on your revenue streams or you've taken on a lot more expenditures and you're not generating enough cash flow to pay your debt. That's not been the case. It has been at a good, strong level, especially the last 5 years. I have run out of graphs and numbers and audit timeline and audit objectives to talk about. So just pause again here at the end for any additional questions that anyone has or added comments to make.
Well, this is Dave, Brian. I don't necessarily have a question. It's just kind of a comment that, your explanation kind of reinforces, what we started under Jim Larson and continue with Tyson is, pre-funding projects and not getting a lot of debt, unless they're very large projects. And I think that just puts us in a good position, especially as you mentioned, the times we're going through now. So, I appreciate you stressing that.
Brian, this is Joe Deutsch. Again, I just want to tell you, as I do every year for the last 14, that I appreciate you taking a subject that it takes a special person to enjoy and recognizing that, and not only making light of it a little bit, but putting things in words and terms that we can all appreciate and understand. So it's one thing to do what you guys do. It's another thing to talk to people about it and maintain their attention. And I'm definitely one that's hard to maintain their attention. So I appreciate your audit every year. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions, comments? All right, Brian, I guess that means you can finalize your report and bring it to next Tuesday's meeting.
Thanks,
Nicely
Brian.
done.
Yes. Okay. We will work with Tyson to get that accomplished, and we'll be back next week in a much shortened version of this presentation.
All right, thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I'll take over from here. Carolyn, I think I'll share my screen here. If that's okay with you.
Yep, go ahead.
And just, I don't know if you noticed that, Brian, there was a little delay on the slides, Tyson, I don't know if that'll happen with your screen or not, but we'll let you know.
We're always 20 to 25 seconds behind.
Great time.
Hey, Tyson, did I call you Tyler when I asked that question earlier?
That's
I think
okay.
I did.
I'm used to that.
My bad. I don't know what I was thinking.
We have 2 other Tylers in the office, so I get it all the time.
Whenever there's a mistake, just blame it on Tyler.
That's right.
There you go.
Okay, can you guys see the screen?
Yep.
Okay, so at this time, the due dates for the 2021 budget are the same dates that have been established in the past. So the preliminary budget is going to be due to Cass County by August 10th of 2020 this year. So in order to meet this deadline, we're just going to have to keep moving forward as we have in past years. Know that the budget's ever changing. We know that we're not going to be able to make final decisions today, but just looking for some guidance on how to move forward with the budget preparation. So during this meeting, we'll just talk about the timeline for the 2020 budget, the projected value of the mill, the potential inflationary increases for salaries and fees, new personnel anticipated for the future, and then just discussing the capital improvements that we have planned for 2020. So first I'll just move into the timeline, and this is a very similar schedule to what we put together last year. Just ensures that we meet all the deadlines that are established by Century Code and by the county. So today we're having our first meeting, just get some general discussion. In the past, we haven't had another meeting till July. This year is going to be different, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. But we need to schedule another meeting either the end of May or beginning in June. One to discuss kind of where we're at in 2020 with our budgets now, and then kind of rediscuss the 2021 budget. But we can talk about that a little bit later. So as far as preparing the budget, our plan would be mid-May, get everything out, have everything prepared, all of our budget schedules sent out to the directors. We'll work with our department heads, get everything put together, compiled, sent back to me by June 12th, June 13th. I would start compiling that, putting it all into our financial software. Then from there, we'd work together as a group, directors, kind of look at where we're at with our revenue projections for next year and start cutting the budget down. The goal would be to have kind of our final preliminary budget compiled and ready beginning in June, so July 8th through July 28th. So on the schedule right now, we have a budget committee meeting for July 8th. We have another one July 29th. We would have the preliminary budget presented to the board on August 4th. So that's the board meeting that we have to move up 1 week just to meet the August 10th that deadline from the county. From there, we'd submit it to the county, invite the form, have the preliminary, the budget inspection, have it available for the public, and then we'd have our hearing in September and then have our final, everything finalized into the county by September 18th. So one thing I wanted to discuss was the second meeting, and if we could schedule the meeting now, that would be great. If not, I can have Tara kind of reach out and coordinate it through email. But two dates that Tara had looked at our calendars and might work would be May 28th or June 3rd. So if we could schedule time now, that would be great. If not, if you'd prefer we just do it through email, we can do it that way too. But just looking for what might work with your guys' schedules.
On the 28th in the afternoon is fine with me, but I do have a full morning that day, and June 3rd's wide open, so.
Okay. Anybody else have any preference, or should we schedule it through email?
I'm looking right now.
You know, May 28th is the last day of school, and I'm sure I'll be doing a lot of things at school that day. The terrible.
That was a joke, Tyson.
Terrible joke.
I got it. Got it.
June 3rd is a Wednesday. Well, as of right now, my entire calendar for 2020 is wide open. So.
And so is mine. As you can tell, Vicki was so excited for her park board meeting today that she got up and showered and put on her park district polo just for the meeting, or pullover. So I haven't gotten to the shower yet, Vic. So don't worry. Wearing my hat.
Yeah, you always need a reason to get dressed, don't you?
I do. I actually kind of looked forward to it today, and then time got away from me because nobody else in this house thinks that I've got anything better to do.
You didn't.
So yeah, I'm wide open. Whatever works for you guys.
I've got some things scheduled, but then I'm open. So I don't know how best to on both days.
Is morning or afternoon? Bet I know Stacy talked about the afternoon on the 28th. How about the 3rd? Is both morning and afternoon open? Or
What do you
one?
define as the morning, Laker?
You know,
Well,
how about we just
Go from 11 to noon.
how about if we just pick 9 a.m. on June 3rd and call her good? Sounds good.
That's still nap time for.
Could we go any earlier on the 3rd?
Oh, no.
I know that Rusty has a standing meeting at 7:30 on
Yep.
Wednesdays. So
Yeah, Wednesday is not a good morning for. Let's go back to Stacy's afternoon. She was talking about back the week before. How's that look?
I'd be available after 3 o'clock or after.
That works for me.
3 o'clock?
Sounds good.
That's the 28th, right?
No.
I think we got a date and time.
Does that work for you guys?
Works for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that works for us. So thank you. We'll get that put on the schedule. Have Sarah send it out. Okay, so any questions on the timeline?
On the one thing where you meet with the forum, is that more, should that be more like invite media to meet on budget, or I'm just curious, or is that historically they've been the only ones that really wanted to see it?
So I think that's based on Century Code. I think we have to have a local paper, give them a month to review our budget and ask any questions on it.
Gotcha.
Well, and it follows the same timeline on the item right below that it's available for the public. So
Yeah.
it's the same thing.
This is just kind of laying it out so we make sure we hit all the pieces that we need to make sure we stay in compliance. Okay, so we'll move on to the next document. So the next one, budget additions for 2021. So again, understand the budget situation is changing every day. So no final decisions need to be made today. We just need to discuss a couple of various items and just get a general direction of how we should move forward preparing the budget. So just jumping into this, mill levy increase. The City of Fargo Assessor's Office released their property valuation report, I believe last month. They're showing a 4.9% increase in property valuations in Fargo. So that's 2.2% new growth, 2.7% growth on existing. So what that would equate to is about 731,000 in additional revenues, tax revenues, if we were to take that new growth and growth on existing for next year. So my recommendation, how I'd like to move forward preparing the budget would be just to keep our mill levies where they're at. Take the 4.9% increase, but not really adjusting our mill levies. So just taking exactly what we had this year. But it's open for discussion. I don't know if anybody has any comments on that.
And I know you're going to talk about it, Tyson, but you show fee increases, and that's typically our CPI index is how we come up with those fee increases.
Yeah, so if we want to move on to the next one, so the fee increases, the 50,000, that was in there from last year. And what we've done in the past is we've increased fees based on inflation. So the CPI index for last year was 1.2%. So really looking for direction on how we move forward. Do we want to do what we've done in the past historically? Do we want to freeze our fees from this year to next year, not increase? Do we want to increase more? So again, just another topic for discussion on how we should prepare, how the commissioners feel we should prepare a budget for 2021.
So Tyson, these fees are for T-ball, golf, programs, events.
Yep, exactly.
Well, we don't even know what programs or events or things are going to happen. Of course, that's 7 months from now. I assume we're going to see people that are still obviously impacted by this as well as us.
And Vicki, to your point, we had internal discussions here, and I brought up the recommendation that we consider not raising those fees because of exactly what you said.
Yeah, I'd be inclined to agree. And of course, even if we increase them, we don't know that it's going to be $50,000 worth. So I think putting that number into the budget is probably not the best choice.
Well, and maybe we can use that as a marketing tool too to, I don't want to say goodwill because that's the wrong term, but
Good term. Goodwill gesture.
Goodwill gesture.
I would be right there with you, Kevin. I think it would be a good choice for us to say, you know what, due to the situation and the impact it's had on our community, there will be no fee increases in 2021. I mean, we don't have to make that decision, but I think don't put that $50,000 into the additional revenue. I think is a wise choice when figuring out our budget.
And that's kind of the only thing I was getting to. You've got the 731,000 increase plus 50. So if we zeroed that out, I think, Tyson will discuss the state aid decrease will probably be 600,000 at the minimum, Tyson.
I've talked to various people about it, and some people are saying 50% decrease. Some people are saying 5-10% decrease. So, it's really hard. I've also reached out to the League of Cities. They're supposed to be releasing some revenue projections at the end of this month, but according to their director there, the revenue projections they release are going to be irrelevant. So they're really not going to reflect the actual what we will be projecting. So he says we're not going to know until July. So his recommendation was reach out to the city of Fargo, which I've done, and kind of follow their lead on how they're going to project state aid. But at this point, it could be more, it could be less.
So does that 600,000 represent 20% increase?
Yeah, it's 20% from what we collected last year.
So in all reality, our total revenues would go up by 130,000 for next year if we zeroed out the fees and took the state aid at a minimum. So
yeah,
kind of our budget neutral.
So, and do you know, Tyson, off the top of your head, the past couple of years, did we have fee increases?
Yeah. So last year was a 2% increase, which was the CPI, the inflationary increase. And I'm assuming it was that way the year before as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the 50 here represents, about a 2%, you said?
Yep. Yep. Okay, so we'll move forward with not budgeting for the fee increases, leaving the mill levy, just leaving our mill levy rate where it's at. Then state aid is going to be kind of a work in progress, and that will be updated as we have new information. So next is the compensation pool increase. So again, just looking for direction. In the past, what we've done is we had the inflationary increase. For this year, it was 1.2%. We had an additional market increase of 1% that we added on to there. So if we followed that same model, we'd budget for a 2.2% increase. Another option would be only taking the inflationary increase of 1.2%. Otherwise, the final option, in my opinion, would be freezing salaries and not budgeting for an increase next year. So just looking for your guys' input.
So this would be, what this is showing would be a 2.2% raise across the board. Comes up with
Yep.
that 100,707.
Yep. So that would be the average. The 2.2% would be average across the board for the budget.
And of course, this has nothing, this has no weight on whether we do anything in response to the salary survey, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Vicki, the salary survey, we budgeted last year $140,000 for adjustments for this year, and we just haven't got to it. So that's still in the bank. And then Tyson, correct me, the inflationary increase of 1.2, that in the past has been used for the merit matrix, correct? And the market has been something else, or have both of those been combined into the merit matrix?
They were both combined in the merit matrix.
Okay.
So it all went into one pool.
Okay.
Tyson, this might not be in your wheelhouse, or I'm asking probably an unfair question, but do you know, or have you seen or heard of any government agencies reducing salaries or anything further? I know there's been a number of private industries who have done that, where there's been people have been taking a pay cut. And second part of that would be, if you, in talking with others, have you heard is proposing a freeze in 2021 seem pretty standard?
I haven't had discussions on that. I haven't heard of any governmental entities cutting pay. I hear of them cutting their part-time seasonal staff. I've heard of overtime, obviously freezing, saying no overtime at this point, or at least strictly limiting it. But no, I haven't heard anything as far as what's planned for the future for staff increases.
I can speak on behalf of what's going on in my day job, and a number of campuses have instituted what they're calling a chill. It's not a freeze, but they're chilling on hiring. Be very careful in terms of who they hire and what the needs are. There's been staff that have been furloughed, so they still get their vacation and sick leave and insurance accruals, but they're not getting a paycheck. And the idea is once things open back up, they'll be brought back into their positions. I haven't heard anything out of the governor's office about any kind of allotment, but we're already starting to prepare for the next biennial budget, and it's going to be it's significant. You know, we just went through it in the 2016, 2015, 2014, and we're going to be back at it again, trying to figure out how we're going to work with less money. I've seen a few things more recently on the revenue forecast, and it looks very, very bleak. Oil is pretty much shut down. All the industries have been closed, and people unemployment. There's just a lot of things going on.
Have we slowed down our hiring for seasonal? What do our numbers look like as we're moving forward when we've been in this holding pattern? Or have we been business as usual?
I don't know. Oh, there's Beats. Yeah.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Stacy, this is Dave. I can speak for the operations end of it. I can't give you, necessarily an exact number because a head count number is difficult to do, just because we have some people working less hours, but we may have, more people. But some of the philosophy we've taken initially is, we've looked hard at everything we do and tried to scale back and only bring in people when we need them, with knowing that we're reducing some service, so to speak. And I don't want to scare people. It's going to be stuff that, might not be readily seen. We're still trying to provide a good product to the public, but we're being very cautious, not to bring in our full contingent of people. In some instances, we've even decided we're not going to hire seasonal folks. We made that decision in our maintenance shops for our mechanic helpers that we're not going to bring extra people in that capacity this year. Normally, we employ 2 people in that range. Our carpentry helpers, we're doing the same thing. They've decided not to hire their folks, and they have 2 people assigned to them, seasonal staff. In other areas, we've delayed start times, and normally we would have had people already in at larger numbers than we do right now. Another thing we've done is starting on the 18th is when we have to plant. A lot of our flowers and our trees need to go in by, the first part of June is our goal to hit the right planting time for this climate. What we're doing with those folks is we're lowering the number that we're bringing in, plus we're reducing the hours and working staggered shifts. So it's hard to really give you an accurate head count, but that's why, Tyson, I've been working with him, and so far I think I'm pretty comfortable saying we've had about a 10 to 15% reduction in the expense that we would incur for our seasonal staff and operations.
Okay, so we're absorbing without cutting services, and it's difficult, I'm sure, to even look into the crystal ball and figure out what's going to happen next week, because things could change or they could stay the same, and it's hard to plan for this.
It is. It's really difficult, and if things do change around in June and even into July, a lot of the department heads that I work with are have plans ready to kind of rehire and get people going again and kind of kick us back into high gear if everything is the free and clear. And if it isn't, if it extends much past that, then our normal season for operations anyway usually ends around September 1st, with the exception of maybe about a third of our staff that we keep going into October and early November.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks,
Yep.
Dave.
Yeah, and realize, the grass still needs to be mowed, the garbage needs to be picked up, weeds need to be sprayed. So we're trying to cut in the areas where we can manage, but there's also areas that there's just tasks to be done. So I think everybody's done a good job so far.
And programming, I'm assuming that could look very different depending on guidelines.
Yeah, it will be it could be very different. We'll make a decision here in the middle of the month for the first part of June. Then we'll look at the latter part of May for the end of June and kind of go from there. So, I mean, when you talk pools and facilities, yeah, we're in contact with that group of individuals for work, but not knowing exactly where we're at with these facilities or programs, tough to gauge that number right now.
So, yeah, this is a little off the beaten path, but Kevin, I'm assuming you guys are researching and working and trying to determine if pools can even be open this summer and what that might look like?
Very much so. We're having pretty much daily conversations about that. Dave's got a roundtable with the NDRPA at the same time that I'm on the recreation side of it at the same time. So they're having conversations exactly what to do around the state, specifically in this area as well. So yeah, those are coming fast and furious right now. But one of the issues that we're up against, and I just found this out late yesterday afternoon, is we've got about 15 lifeguards that are not certified, period. The schools will not let us in the pools to do that certification. So working with possibly the YMCA, we can get in and certify these lifeguards to make sure that we are fully functioning once and when if we open.
Kevin,
Yes.
the ice is off the lake. They can just go to the lake and hop in there.
Hey, the roof was leaking at the depot. I said we got a couple buckets down there they could use.
Hop in those. So, Kevin, on a side note to that, is there conversation about not opening some of our pools, any of our pools?
Well, you know, Jerry happened to stop in and had a very good comment, because I said that right away. Maybe we would just open, you know, one on the south side, one on the north side. And Jerry's come back to me as, well, then you're gonna have all those people go to those pools. He's exactly right. So has there been conversations about that? Yes. Has there been conversations about reduced hours? Yes. So all those things are on the table at this time. It'll come down to whatever the government and local and state officials say once we get to that phase.
Well, and of course, pools aren't just, you know, from our standpoint, one of the concerns is the expense. And if we're sitting in a really tight spot come the end of May, not opening a pool or pools may be something we have to factor in from an expense side, not just from a resource side.
Right. And then we'd have to, I fully support that. We just have to be, you know, in future creative to make sure we get those kids back for future employment at the pools, because once you take it away, they start looking somewhere else.
Absolutely.
And Vicki, we've had those conversations internally about making a responsible decision, and that's what we've talked about exactly is, you know, we're going to have to at some point choose a date and say at what point does it make sense that we just say we're not doing the pools altogether, because there is a large price tag that's associated with it. So we need to keep that in mind and make that responsible decision.
Yeah. And I mean, I will say that the pools serve a great purpose, especially for a certain part of our community. And, you know, I'm not suggesting we close the pools, and I think it's important that we have pools available to people, but we're not in normal times, and we're going to have to make some very hard decisions here in the next month or so, I think.
Well, we're looking at programs for maybe half a season, i.e. like baseball. You know, if it does get pushed down to, you know, that later June into July, we'll have to make those tough decisions coming forward that either we're going to have a reduced schedule or the whole season's out the door.
Sure.
Yeah, and
I mean, we have the financial concerns about it, and then we also have that other concern that I don't want. I'd rather, you know, not have kids, I mean, just be like, you know what, we just don't have pools for this one summer, then create a scenario where, you know, where kids can't relax and be kids and feel like they can use the pool the way they're supposed to. Like, for example, you know, locker rooms are going to be unusable probably, right? I mean, I don't know. You can't touch the, you know, you can't go on the physical structures because, you know, I mean, I don't know. I just don't want kids to ever have to feel guilty about being kids.
It's going to be a delicate balance to determine, you know, there's so many variables. How much does it cost to get the pools up and running? Is it too late to justify the cost? What are we going to do with the kids and the families that depend on our pools for recreation and, you know, letting off some steam in the summer? So I think that thank you for monitoring it and talking about what it looks like. And it's a week by week thing. I don't think that anything is going to be set in stone for about 5 years at this point. We're just kind of going with what's happening. And it's unfortunate.
And we're getting a lot of calls lately about pools programs. Even these last couple of days have been a lot of people asking, you know, and you got to be respectful of their comments, but at the end of the day, it's like, you know, it's tough to make decisions 2 weeks down the road when you don't know what's happening next week.
Kevin, and you've maybe already thought of this, but I'd like to suggest, and you guys maybe are having these conversations of, if the pools cannot open, what is an alternative for us? And Dave Clunt and I have had this conversation of an improvised splash pad. Let's say it's 100 degrees on September 10th. What would we do? Could we throw hoses in trees? Could we throw out a makeshift slip and slide? Could we put something together that would provide some kind of water experience, keeping in mind that we have plenty of people who probably don't have air conditioning in their homes and would need some kind of relief. You know, so should the pools not be able to open, I'd love to see us come up with some kind of alternative that would fit within the CDC guidelines.
Sure.
Sorry, I got us off the beaten path. I think we were on compensation pool increase.
So is there any recommendations from the commissioners on how we should prepare the budget?
Tyson, I think you're on the right track. I think you plan on there being a freeze, and if there's not, that's great. I think we budget for the toughest of times, and knowing that if things recover, we can adjust accordingly, but I'd rather do that than go the other way. What does everybody else think?
Well, I guess in my mind, a budget's a budget. It's a guideline. It's what we shoot for, but obviously we're going to have to roll with any punches of you know, we're talking about, we don't know next week. Are we going to know June and July and September and November? I mean, the speculations are across the entire spectrum. So, you know, I think we plan our budget and be frugal as we can, but, you know, we still have to anticipate that we're going to be operating at a fairly normal level. We pretty much maintained that so far, and it seems like things are starting to open up. So I'm comfortable with doing a budget that's, and I think I'd like to think that every year we're frugal with our budget. It's not like we're lavishly throwing a bunch of new money out there. So I'm comfortable with what I've seen so far.
So Jerry, for the compensation pool increase, do we leave it as what Tyson has represented, as what we've always done, or are you Vicky's saying, do we zero it out and then make adjustments later? I mean, we could include it in the budget, and if things don't pan out, that could be one of your cutbacks for next year, but.
I think we go with what you're presenting here, but we'll still have time, and we'll know more in June and July. And the past couple of years, we've cut things at the 12th hour. I know that's not the greatest way to do a budgeting, but you know, particularly on the heels of the pandemic, you know, I think we start with what we think we need to do, and then as things become, as we get more data and we get data-driven decisions, that we can adjust. We could adjust either way, I guess. We could add in later, or we could subtract out. I guess it just depends upon what the other commissioners are thinking.
So question, when is the final approval of the budget again?
September, isn't it?
Yep, September is the final. The
When are
preliminary
we,
August 10th.
yeah, when are we, I mean, end of July is when we've really, you know, given you the last guidance, and it should be firming up? Yes?
July 8th would be preferable. July 28th would be kind of the last day.
So here's my concern. You know, I know everything is supposedly public meetings and whatever. I don't know how it works with all this, but we're for the first time that I can remember in forever, guaranteed to have a new commissioner. So, you know, that's going to be that's. I mean, I remember Jerry and Rusty feeling uncomfortable with the timing of everything. So I guess my question is do we reach out to the candidates, you know, and ask them to come listen on these things, or do we just leave it alone? I don't know, but I just want to bring that to light, that we're guaranteed at least one new commissioner at what, July, beginning of July?
Third week of June would be the swearing in, right?
Yeah. So take that information for what it is, but let's not ignore it, because it could be a concern.
And I'm comfortable with leaving the inflationary and market adjustment in right now, just because we don't know what's happening week to week. And it's something that, you know, if we absolutely needed to, we could pull out. The other thing we haven't seen is the market or the salary survey results either. And so it'd be nice to at least see where that's at. And I know that this probably isn't the right time, but we need to understand, you know, how our salaries compare to the marketplace and where we're at. And as far as the preparing of the budget, Jerry's right. A budget is a guideline, and money could be in there, but you don't have to spend it if you don't have it. So.
Okay, so I think how I'll move forward is leaving the 100,000, the salaries increases in there. And we'll revisit it at a later date.
Can I ask more of a foundational question? As you prepared this particular budget, and we know there's a lot of unknowns, how do you feel comfortable that you have approached it from, we're going to have to deal with some cuts, and so we put it together this way, or you try and not factor that in? And I'm guessing it's the former, not the latter.
Yeah, I think we leave the expenses in there. So be conservative, we can cut them out later. So if we need to adjust down, we can do that at the later point. But at least then we're accounting for them when we have them out there. We can make an adjustment. We can adjust as we go.
Any other questions regarding that? Okay.
Okay, so next is seasonal staff changes. So that was a carryover from last year. I think that's just returning seasonal staff that are getting a little bit of a bump in pay. So if I'll plan on leaving that in there unless there's any objections.
No, and I actually, I think with lifeguards especially, I'm not sure about other positions, but I think we have to do our best to get ourselves up to par with the other places that they can seek employment. So
Yeah.
I think this addition needs to be in there.
Well, and I think too that, you know, there's a cost to spin somebody up, and if we've spun somebody up and we bring them back again this year, as opposed to hiring somebody new, we don't have that up training to get them up to speed. So that's something, offer them a little bit more to entice them to come back as opposed to find something else.
Okay, so we'll leave that line in there. Next, move on to staffing. Again, the budget, we know the budget outlook is changing every day. So we aren't necessarily saying with these positions that we're going to hire them with certainty in 2021 and 2022. But they are positions that the Park District sees a need for in the future. Wanted to get them in front of the commissioners just so you are aware of it. We're going to be monitoring the budget outlook and don't necessarily know that we're going to be hiring these positions next year. We just want to get it on your radar. So the first one, IT manager. So the park districts, we're becoming more and more dependent on technology every day. We feel that just right now is a good time to have a full-time dedicated IT person on staff. Just someone, I think monitoring security is a big concern right now, just helping us implement some new solutions and just troubleshooting our existing solutions that we have out there. I think it would be a huge benefit for our staff. It would also help with the workload and operations. Tyler is currently overseeing IT right now, and he'll tell you that that's a full-time job in itself. Also, with our new IT contract, there are going to be some savings next year. We haven't done a salary survey of that position yet, but I would anticipate that we'll be saving enough next year in IT to pay for the majority of that salary, if not all of it. But I know, Jerry, we had discussions about this. I think it was at the RFP meeting for the new IT vendor. And I think security is a big concern right now. So having somebody dedicated full-time would be a huge benefit to the park district, in my opinion.
And do we have dollars to go along with these anticipated staff?
We don't. And it's really preliminary at this point. Again, we just wanted to get them on your radar so you kind of knew what we were thinking in the future. Really, these were identified when we were doing our org chart meetings before COVID even started. So it wasn't even a factor at that point. So
this total expenses of $310,707 doesn't factor in any of these 10
No.
plus positions.
No, it does not. And the anticipated hiring year, I should have just left it out because really there's so much in the air right now. We have no idea when we'd be able to move on these positions. But it's just what we're looking for in the future.
So Tyson, are you suggesting that you would budget for them or not budget for them?
Not planning to budget for them at this point.
For 2021 or?
I can maybe jump in here. A lot of these positions we had budgeted for, a typical year, and some of these positions were going to be budgeted for in 2021. But with everything that's happened over the last couple months, we kind of talked as a directors group and decided instead of budgeting for these for 2021, we defer them till 2022, as we've kind of done with some of our other expenses. And I think the two you see there in 2021, Tyson mentioned one, the IT manager, that could possibly be a budget neutral position just because of the savings we've had in IT. And, allowing Tyler to get back to his project manager position. And then he also shows a controller in here. And we've talked about this several years ago, and it just never came to fruition. We want to see how things worked out in our finance department. And I think Tyson's made a big push that if we did go with this position in 2021, and again, I think this would be an offset of the deputy director's position, so it could be budget neutral. And even some savings, but I think Tyson, talking with him, we feel that if we had a controller like this, and it'll, basically what it would replace is our accounting manager, who will be retiring in 2 years approximately. And then we'd hire that position at maybe an entry-level accountant. But what it would allow is the finance director to maybe oversee some other positions like IT and possibly HR. So that's kind of my thoughts. And if anybody wants to jump in, Tyson, I probably stole some of your thunder there, but.
Oh, no, that's okay. So the controller, yeah, a big piece would be succession planning. Chris is planning to retire next couple of years. So we'd like to have some overlap with her in this new position. The moving administrative functions, HR and IT, like Dave said. I think the foundation is another one where Brian's overseeing it right now. But just because he has experience with foundations, doesn't make sense for once he retires, and I'm assuming he's going to, it's on his radar at some point. It doesn't necessarily belong as the Valley Senior Services Director to oversee that. So that's another area. There's potentially some other areas. So I think it'd free up a lot of the work. I think it could potentially impact each of the directors' area. Then just cross-training with myself and with the business office, and just allowing them to kind of do tasks that haven't been completed in the past, and also cross-train with each other. Right now, I think it's just a lot of silos of information. Nobody really knows. There is some crossover, but there's a lot of it where one person knows how to do something and nobody else does, and it works really well if everybody's here. But when somebody leaves, it like we saw with Jim, it doesn't pan out too well.
Well, it would be helpful if you could put some numbers to it, just even if it is revenue neutral or expense neutral. It would be helpful to see that, you know, we are saving X amount in IT with our new contract, and an IT supervisor would cost approximately this. So we can kind of, for me anyway, it would be helpful to kind of puzzle it out a little bit. And I appreciate the succession planning piece of this. And I can see that your org chart meetings are, you know, coming together with a plan that works for the park district. And but when we put it on here, I don't want to downplay it at all. I want to make sure that we have actual numbers and actual reasoning behind this, because if we don't have a good reason to have them on here, even though we need it, they may get just dropped off somewhere in the future, and that would be a bad thing for the park district in the long run. So it would be nice to, even if it isn't in this particular budget planning process, but I think we need to discuss this so that we can keep it on our radar and be ready when the time comes.
A big reason why I didn't include the amounts is just the uncertainty for this year. You know, I think in July we'll have a better idea of state aid, and we'll have a better idea of whether it's even feasible to move forward with any of these positions. So I think in the future meetings, we can put some numbers to these and get them out to the commissioners.
Okay, thank you.
Sounds good, thanks. So really, Tyson, the only two we have to worry about for this coming year's budget would be the IT manager and the controller.
Those would be the only two that we're planning for at this point.
So the others, well, it's nice to get a glance of 2022. For budgeting purposes, we don't need to see it today, correct?
Yep, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
The only thing that I'd say about the IT manager position is, you know, I think we need to be careful when we go into this that we don't hire a technician that's running around, you know, fix break on people's desktops and making sure the printer's mapped correctly. I really think, and you talked a little bit about it, we need a higher level person to be ensuring that our systems are secure and that we are, we've got our systems and approach to how we manage IT so that we're maximizing and leveraging technologies. We don't have 15 different versions of laptop computers, for instance, that we kind of consolidate into a certain type and style of machine, and then planning for replacements, all of that stuff. We just need to have somebody a little bit higher level than, you know, service tech.
Yeah, and our
And
plan would be to continue to utilize our current, the corporate technologies is our new IT vendor. So our plan would be for this person to work hand in hand with them. So they would still continue kind of the day-to-day tasks, and then this person would hopefully be able to focus on the more higher level security, those types of things.
Okay, good.
So that's the first two. Do we want to talk about the other ones, or do we, since they're not planned for next year, do we want to skip those?
Yeah, I think we can just maybe skip them for now, but at least show them on another schedule for future discussions, unless anybody wants to discuss them.
Yeah, I think we got enough uncertainty with top two.
So next is block 9. Block 9, we budget be somewhat to have a minimal loss. Within that budget, we budget for $200,000 from corporate sponsorships. I think it's going to be really difficult to get $200,000 from corporate sponsorships next year. So I think that it's going to be, we're going to lose some money on block 9 next year, depending on when it opens and everything falling into place. But so that's that additional operating costs on the block 9 plaza.
What is the anticipated start date?
Holiday Lights Parade, isn't it?
Yeah, it would be the holiday lights parade that Tuesday before Thanksgiving is what everybody's planning for.
That's still on track?
Well, I mean, they're supposed to start construction this month over there, so, you know, we'll have to see how construction goes throughout the summer, and we'll have updates as it progresses.
We have a advisory board meeting coming up in the next couple of weeks to talk about the construction, but our last conversation with Keith from the Kilborn Group was that they would have that ready in November.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
So in total, if we kept with this model, we take out that 50,000 revenue, we'd be at about $180,000 down from this current year. But like Dave mentioned, we have some IT cost savings. We have the deputy director that wasn't factored in here. So we'd be about break even based on how we're projecting out right now. Any other questions on this? Okay, so the last thing I wanted to discuss was the capitals for 2020. At the last budget meeting, there was discussions on just how we need to make capital improvements in 2020, not kick stuff down the road. So what we did was put together a listing of our improvements that one have either already been done this year or that are planned for this year. So this listing, it isn't all inclusive. There are some stuff that we're missing. I mean, there's some repairs that we're missing. I believe we did Lindenwood bathroom remodel, which we missed on the schedule. So it's not all inclusive, but there is about $943,000 that we're planning on doing this year. So with the money we're spending on equipment, on debt service, on facility improvements, we will exceed our obligation for that Parks and Rec facility mill levy. So what I would recommend is that we don't do any further capital improvements beyond this, other than we're going to have some repairs, just stuff that we haven't budgeted for. But beyond that, I know there was discussion on whether we need to do more. So I just wanted to get commissioners' input on that, on whether these improvements are enough or whether they look for additional. 943,000 is what we're projecting.
So Tyson, what's the magic number that we have to spend on capital improvements this year?
So it was 2.8 million, but that includes our debt service that we pay. So that our capital leases at the North Maintenance Facility Shop and notes at Davies Pool. It also includes equipment which is not on here. So the equipment to maintain our facilities, so the mowers and that type of stuff.
So once you take those things out, what's left?
That's this 943,000.
what's left that we're obligated to spend?
About 1.9 million.
Are you telling me 1.9 million total or 1.9 million's left to spend?
So we're already going to be overspending our obligation by about 500,000.
Okay, so now don't get excited, but I'm just asking a simple question. So right here on this, you have 943,000, give some change, plus some change. Of that 943,000, you only have to do, would you say $500,000 worth
Oh.
of this?
Yep. Yep, correct.
So the rest of that money could be used for other shortcomings?
Yes, potentially. A lot of them have already been done or already scheduled. A lot of the stuff's been ordered already. But yes, potentially.
And
And oh, go ahead.
go ahead, Dave.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think we've kind of met as a group and came up with a minimalist list of what really needs to be done this year, and we deferred the things that we could defer to next year. So while we could trim this down to 500,000, I think some of these repairs just have a priority to get done this year.
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily saying we do. I'm just trying to figure out the math of what we're obligated to do and what we don't have to do. But so this is we don't know. Looking at this, I can't tell what's already done and what's not already done. Would that be correct?
Correct.
And Dave, would you say that this is the planned list, that we're planning on spending this $943,000 to complete everything on this list?
Yes, for this year. And I think Tyson, how much did we defer? 1.6?
About 1.3.
So we've already basically deferred 1.3 million in new projects and repairs and everything deferred to next year. So
Of that total 2.8, is that what you're saying?
well, we had about 1.3 million we deferred plus this 900,000. So we had about 2.2 million scheduled in repairs and maintenance this year, and we pushed off one. We've already cut 1.3 of that. I guess if that's the way to explain it. Through talking with everybody, the directors, we felt that, if we need to meet 1.6 million in possible revenue shortcomings through May, what can we defer to next year in our capitals list? And we have identified about 1.3 million that we're going to defer. And then with other savings, we can get over that 2 million, I think 2.4 million, Tyson.
So what we've done so far, just been going through the operating schedules and professional development, everything else. We've identified about 2.5 million that we have available to cut if needed. And I'm still working. I know Kevin and his team are working on going through theirs, and I need to sit down with Beats and Carolyn as well and kind of do the same thing.
Okay. So the $1.3 million of projects that were planned for 2020 that are being deferred, we don't have those. We don't see those, right?
Nope, those aren't on the schedule.
Okay.
So I guess what I was looking for is whether there was a need or whether the commissioners would like us to do more than this. I guess I was just looking at it from the capital planning and the long range planning perspective.
Well, there are some on here that I question the need. I appreciate that you guys have already pushed back $1.3 million worth of projects, and I understand it's super frustrating when you plan to do something and you say, gosh, we're going to get that done in 2020, and won't that be great to have that project done? And then somebody says, sorry, you don't get to do that, so keep your cruddy whatever. I know for simple example, the locker rooms at the sports arena mean, I'm sure somebody would be super excited about getting that project done. And if you yanked it, that's kind of a bummer.
Well,
That's one that's already started. So
that's
every-
Yeah, and I'm just using that as an example because it's one that I mean, is going to be very obvious and telling, and people are going to go, whoa. And right now people go in there and go, oh, what are these cruddy wood lockers? So I'm just using it as an example. But, so I know I can't imagine the frustration you guys feel when you're looking forward to getting a project done that you know is going to enhance our building or our facility or our park. And then someone says, no, sorry, wait till next year. So,
And just so the commissioners are aware, we included, you know, a lot of our department heads in these decision makings too, because of just for that reason that Vicky brought up. It is impactful to all of them. You know, we went through an exercise and had them prioritize things. And, you know, the main reason we put this list together was at the last budget meeting, the request was made to maybe, you know, take this time as an opportunity and get some of the work done to our things. And so as we went through and looked at all the different reductions we could possibly make, taking all the information from our teams and prioritizing everything, this was the list that we had come up with and saying, okay, here's all the projects that are either already done or in situation, so to speak, or just starting, or else some are on there that are just desperately needing to get done, and you know, for one reason or another. So that's kind of just a little bit of background as how we developed this list.
okay, so I would take a guess that the canopies or shade structures for the North and Davies Pool are already ordered.
correct.
Yeah. That would have been an easy 45 grand to come up with.
And we have done that, Vicky, in some instances. Like, you know, a good example is the driving range tee at Osgood Golf Course. That's part of that 1.3 million in reduction we've already done. Is we weren't going to do that project until late fall, and that's when we felt, you know what, here's a $45,000 expense that we can defer to another year.
Yep. Well, I appreciate you guys cutting this off and the careful consideration. It'd be interesting to see the items that didn't make the cut, that somebody somewhere within the park district was so looking forward to having done at their building or their park or their facility or their golf course. So, you know, tell the staff that we understand it's not easy for them. You know, it's easy for me to knock things off, but it impacts some of them more than it does us.
Well, it sounds to me like you guys did not take this lightly, and you've spent the time and effort to go through things, and you were very cautious and careful, and I appreciate your diligence in trimming back already with the expectations that we're going to have less money to deal with.
I concur with Jerry. It's tough to get excited and keep everything moving forward, and all of a sudden something completely beyond our control derails us completely. And you've done a good job of coming up with the loss that we're expecting and looking forward to any more anticipated potential losses and how to cover them so that we can stay whole. Because as my husband said the other day, you guys have a lot of grass to mow. And we have to take care of what we have, and we can't get too far behind in our maintenance, or somewhere down the road in 5 years, we'll be up to our eyeballs in deferred maintenance. So I appreciate your hard work.
Okay, well, this is the improvement list that we'll move forward with for plan for 2020. But other than that, I didn't have any other items.
So Tyson, those deferred capitals, would we expect to see those on the 2021 list?
I'm anticipating so, yep.
In addition to what was already on the 2021 list?
Yeah, I'm guessing it'll be a bigger list this year than it has been in the past.
Yeah. Which of course, you know, may impact something else.
Okay, is there anything else? Any other questions?
No, just to reiterate, you guys have done a wonderful job of trying to get in front of the budget shortfalls, and I can certainly tell that you've done the hard work, so thank you.
Okay, so the next budget meeting will be May 28th at 3 o'clock. And then hopefully by that point we have better, I don't think it's going to be set in stone kind of how we're going to move forward, but hopefully we have some state aid numbers. We have a better idea of our revenue projections. And we have a chance to go through operating budgets a little more. But until then, I think that'll be our next discussion.
All right. Thank you. Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
all.
I thought for sure we'd be out here before.